But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gina Lamb, 92, who has so expertly coordinated this panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. And it's great to see everyone. Thank you for making time this evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world to join us. As Belinda mentioned, for those of you just joining, do rename yourself if you come in as her clone. We're working on that piece, but that was just a little something extra that went with the registration. So I want to welcome you all to Green Table Talks. This is a concept that came out of the class of 1992. We just wanted to do something a little different for our 30th reunion on this call. Stephanie is a class 92 with myself, and Kimberly is also here. The idea is that we are having a no holds barred conversation around life at Dartmouth, whether it was 5, 10 years ago or 45, 55 years ago, like we're going to get into today. I'm going to introduce, so Stephanie is our chat master, because the idea is that we'd like to get folks to participate, to chime in as we go along, as you get comfortable with that. Stephanie, I don't know if there was anything on geography we want to say about our registration.
We've got registrations all over the US, so yay. A lot from California and a lot from New York, as we would expect, but we even have some as far away as Bangkok and Hong Kong.
Awesome.
So thank you for those people for messing up your sleep to join us.
The diaspora is strong, and all allies and community are welcome to learn more about our early years as AAPI at Dartmouth. And so the background here, for those of you who read what Green Table Talk, where it gets its inspiration, it comes from Red Table Talk, which is Jada Pinkett Smith's Facebook series, where several voices come to the table, diverse voices across generations in her case. And that's what we're being inspired by, to really have some reflections around Dartmouth life, the highs and lows since graduation, and more. This one will focus on those early years, those pioneering experiences of lesser known origin stories around AAPI at Dartmouth. And we're going to hear specifically about 2 decades. So before and after coeducation, think about late 60s and late 70s. So many walks of life, one Dartmouth entanglement, no filter. We are at the table for real talk and true testimony. So what happened after Dartmouth? What's the rest of the story? The life experience, the lessons learned, the unexpected, and the unimaginable. So to kick off the conversation, we've got 4 amazing alums that have agreed to start this conversation. In class order, we've got Cedric Kam here, class of 68, Honolulu-born and Boston-based. He went from ROTC at Dartmouth to Army Civil Affairs during the Vietnam War, and then city planner, banker, and HUD community developer. And now he's the president of the class of 1968. We then have Dan Tom, also class of 68, Wahiawa-born and Honolulu-based. He was part of Glee Club while at Dartmouth, and then went on to Tunghai as an English instructor, and then the University of Hawaii as Language+Tech Mandarin educator, and fit in 37 years of marathon running. That was 37 marathons in 37 years, which is still shocking to me. And he continues to sing today in a barbershop harmony chorus. Then we have Evelyn Chih-Yih Chan, a soprano and class of 1977, Taipei-born and San Diego-based by way of Paris. She was also a part of Glee Club as a soloist, and ultimately ended up advocating in her second life for forbidden music. We'll learn what that's about. Music banned by the Nazis. And it's a nonprofit she founded, which has been responsible for putting the repertoire back in circulation. And then we have Celia Chen, class of 1978, New York City born and Hanover based. Once on the Dartmouth swim team back in the day, she has become a preeminent voice on mercury and PFAS and its effect on the food web as an ecotoxicologist, researcher, and ecology professor at Dartmouth College. I'm your moderator, New York City based and Miami New York City born and Miami based. At Dartmouth, I was chair of the Asian Studies House. That's kind of one of my fondest memories of my time in that house with the professor from China. And I went on to work on billion-dollar brands at Procter & Gamble as a marketer. And I'm currently founding a social tech platform for the creative class. So that's who's here to start us off. And we're going to start with a lightning round here to hear more to warm us up here. The prompt, and it's again a quick round. The prompt that we're going to start with is about our life-altering effects of Dartmouth. And so we have two prompts in particular. One is Dartmouth made me, and you fill in the blank. And the other one is because of Dartmouth, I. So I'll go as an example. I'll go first in that I give Dartmouth a whole lot of credit for what I might today called feeling entitled. I came out of New York City as a child of immigrants and ended up marrying a 91, and I interracially married, right? I married white, and I ended up in a 28-year relationship, which I'm still in, with, the father of my 4 children. So I definitely give Dartmouth credit. I use this word of entitlement because there is an air of, once you get to an Ivy League campus, there is a lot of claiming your seat at the table. And there are many of us that actually could probably need to learn a little bit more of that, but also it has its complexity. So I'm going to go next and ask Celia, how do you think of because of Dartmouth, you?
I guess because of Dartmouth, I was able to realize my dream of living in Vermont because it's across the river from Hanover, and also becoming a environmental scientist, which I had wanted to do since 8th grade. And I think Dartmouth made me braver in the out of doors. I grew up never having gone on a hike. I didn't go on a freshman trip because I was afraid to go. And I love the out of doors now. And so Dartmouth really changed that for me.
Dan, how about you?
Well, at the suggestion of a Dartmouth friend of mine who was in the upper class, a class above me, I changed my focus in my major from American history to Chinese history. Told me that there were too many students going into American history and very few were studying Chinese history. Because of that choice, I wouldn't have gone to Taiwan and China and had some of the experiences that I had, such as attending the Sunday chapel service of Madame Chiang Kai-shek and being in Taiwan when Chiang Kai-shek passed away.
And you, I'm going to ask you to double down on that one because Dartmouth made you, in particular, you mentioned aware of certain current issues that were happening in the world. Do you want to talk about that as well?
Yes. It made me think more about current issues. President Dickey had instituted the Great Courses program for seniors. So the college brought in many speakers whose talks were open to all students. We heard from civil rights activist Malcolm X, who happened to be assassinated 1 month after speaking at Dartmouth, General Lewis Hershey, head of the Selective Service, and George Wallace, who was running for president. And I also joined ROTC because we were concerned about the Vietnam War. And if I was going to serve, I wanted to serve as an officer. There was Army, Navy, and Air Force ROTC, and I chose to go into Air Force ROTC. And I was in it for 2 years until I was medically disqualified because I had asthma after the age of 12. A substantial number of my classmates were also in ROTC.
Thank you, Dan. Evie, how about you? Because of Dartmouth, what life-altering experience did you end up with?
Yes, I was very fortunate in that I learned certain musical skills that were required of the music major, which served me extremely well when I got out in the real world and pursued a career in music. To wit, sight reading, both at the keyboard and score reading of, for example, string quartet scores, meaning you sit down at the piano, but you had to play all 4 parts up at the same time on the piano. That was one skill that has served me extremely well. But I don't think that keyboard proficiency exam is actually required of music majors now, which is, too bad. Of course, back then it was a killer exam, lots of music majors sweated over it, but it has really served me well. So
now, you also mentioned to me, Evie, that that's conductor level skills.
Oh yeah. That's what conductors will need to do. They look at a new score, for example, a new score, orchestral score of a piece that has never been performed, for example. So no recording, no nothing. And you have to be able to look at the score, however many parts there are, and either be able to hear all the parts in your head, or better yet, if you're able to play all the different parts on the piano so that you can better hear it for yourself or playing for somebody else. For example, if you're trying to promote a certain piece by a new composer and you're trying to convince the concert organizer to program this piece, you have to show the concert organizer what the piece might sound like. Okay, so you have to be able to read this Gigunda thing on the piano and say, hey, doesn't this sound nice? Doesn't this sound interesting? Why don't we program it? Okay, so that's basically what's required of conductors, since forever. But for some reason, Dartmouth, the music major, they require that, maybe not orchestral scores, but at least string quartet level. And that's 4 different parts. And I still remember going into, I had never even seen a string quartet part, a score before, but when I went into the exam, the keyboard exam contained 3 parts. The first part is like a Bach chorale, like hymns, church hymns. You just sit down and, that's pretty easy if you have studied piano. And then the next part was like a simple Mozart sonata. So it's still pretty, straightforward, right hand and left hand. And then came the score reading, the string quartet. And I remember there were 4 lines. The first 2 are the top 2 are violin 1 and violin 2, which is in the piano, the soprano clef, or
So
if you
Evie,
play piano,
you're
it's
like going
right.
way over our heads right now.
Not me.
And they're loving it right there. I'm gonna have to hold on that one because I know there's a piece in particular we want to share with everyone about how special Dartmouth was in the world of music. So let me just round out this question
absolutely.
With Dan coming in here and sharing what was the life-altering experience that came out of Dartmouth for you?
Life altering.
Sorry, Cedric. I already covered. Cedric, you're rounding us out.
No problem. So before my senior year of high school, my father's co-worker, Paul Liu, class of Dartmouth 52, sat me down and said, you're going to go to Dartmouth. And I said, why? And he said, you'll know. And so I'll tell you how I came to know. Like you, Gina, I met my soulmate, married her after graduation. And because Dartmouth was a men's college at the time, she happened to be Hillary's classmate at Wellesley. So I got to meet Bill Clinton. I've been to the Clinton White House twice. And also I've had a most amazing career to have Dartmouth on my resume. I jumped around between corporate America and the federal government a couple of times. And it's been just an amazing life. And I can stop there because I can fill in later.
Thank you, Cedric. So I'm going to move us along here, and I'm going to ask Celia to answer the prompt about telling us about a time when Dartmouth brought you to your knees.
Yeah. Well, when we were at Dartmouth, Dartmouth still had an outward bound program. And like I said, I hadn't ever gone on a hike in my entire life. So a friend of mine had done, you could do a term at Dartmouth and you would be taking outward bound. At the same time, you would be taking one of your 3 classes with the other people in your outward bound group. But it also involved things like expeditions and, week-long canoe trips, things I had never done. And I can say that the expedition up into the White Mountains with a 60-pound pack literally brought me to my knees. So, but it was an incredibly good challenge, and it made me not afraid of being in the out of doors.
It's such a feather in the hat to think that Dartmouth was associated with with the Outward Bound in the early days. So just incredible to hear about that. Which then takes me to this prompt around, what did you leave behind at Dartmouth? And I'm going to start with Cedric on this one.
I think I left behind my childhood at Dartmouth. I remember coming into Dartmouth and John Sloan Dickey addressed us as men of Dartmouth. And it was the first time I'd been called a man. And by the time we graduated, I began to realize that we had grown up during those 4 years at the college. And we were prepared to go into the wide, wide world, as the song goes. But I have to tell everybody as a confession, Dan and I not only knew each other since freshman year, my mother adopted him as soon as she found out there was another kid from Hawaii in my class. And so Dan and I have been really close friends for what, Dan, 60 odd years?
Yeah.
And we're probably also distant cousins because all the Chinese in Hawaii are related. So I'll stop there.
So Cedric, share with us why being men of Dartmouth was so meaningful in terms of what you were facing once you left Dartmouth and the decisions that people were making as a result.
Yeah, our generation had to make some very early life decisions about what we were going to do upon graduation. Because as you know, it was the Vietnam War. And a lot of us took ROTC. I will say I had planned to do that anyway, because I really wanted to experience life as an Army officer, just to see what it would be like. I thought it would be a good maturing experience. And indeed it was, to be, in your early 20s, to be given life and death authority over another group of people. But Dartmouth really, because of the war, I had classmates who ate to obesity and died early so that they would be 4F and not draftable. I had classmates who married, and then when the draft started drafting married men, had families, had children in order not to be drafted. I had classmates who moved to Canada, never came back to the US to escape the draft. And then for those of us who went into the military, we had to decide what we were going to do and how we were going to survive. I lucked out because I'd gone to grad school on a deferment from ROTC. I had a master's in city and regional planning. And I walked into the United States Army Civil Affairs School and said, "Who are you?" And they said, "We're military government. We ran Japan and Germany after World War II. Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Second Lieutenant Kam. I just got my master's in city planning." And immediately a colonel said, "Come work for us. We can change your orders. We'll keep you out of Vietnam." And I literally got to teach city planning and community development and village economic development, all the things I wanted to do after I got out of the Army. I got to do that in the Army. And so I will say that in the Army, I ran a podium and a Kodak ectographic projector with slides and got to speak to US Army, Air Force, Marines, foreign officers from Britain, Egypt, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Jordan, Australia, up to the rank of general. And so it set me for life. That experience was very maturing. And I don't have a problem speaking in front of any size group, as you can tell.
So I'm going to segue over to Dan, who, as Cedric mentioned, the two of them are from Hawaii. And so, Dan, when you think about what you left behind at Dartmouth, what is it for you?
Well, I left behind a lot of memories, and one particular memory stands out because, as you know, coming from Hawaii, I did not have a white Christmas. And right now, of course, the semester ends the day before Thanksgiving, whereas in our time, it ended several days before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was in the green, middle of the green was a very tall Christmas tree, was very decorated. And there were smaller Christmas trees on the sidewalk surrounding the green. And so that scene is a special memory for me. And I came back from studying and had to cross the green to my dorm. And I looked at the lights and I kept thinking about Christmas and about how soon finals would be over. And that memory has always stuck with me.
Because it ended up being some of your last winter wonderland memories, right? Because you went back to Hawaii.
So,
yeah. Evie, did you want to share anything on what you left behind at Dartmouth?
Actually, I don't think I can say that, something I left behind per se, but just a very general, but great gratitude for everything that I was able to do and all those things that were true gifts, not just to me, but for to most, if not all students. But we were not aware of at the time. It's only after leaving, how many years, years later, you think back and say, oh my God, I didn't realize how fortunate I was or we were. I think that's probably true of anyone here, that we were so young, we just, so many things, we just took it for granted. This is the way it was, and just, and then it was only years later as we go on the, live in the real world and see all, meet all kinds of people. And then we realized, God, we really had it on a silver platter the whole time and we never realized it. So voila.
Thank you, Evie. And Celia, when you think about what you left behind, this one's.
Yeah, I think when you and I chatted, I think one of the things, and it's not a positive thing, actually, it's, I think that I felt like I came to Dartmouth with much more of a voice. And I think I left Dartmouth with less of a voice. And I think in part, it's not an all male Dartmouth, it's a very male Dartmouth. And I was in the sciences and I barely ever saw, other students. I mean, it was mostly male classmates. And so I think that is something that I think about a lot because I teach Dartmouth students now. And I think a lot about, how it feels to be in a classroom and be afraid to raise your hand and all those kinds of things. I mean, and so I think that's what I would say. I feel like maybe I lost it as I was at Dartmouth. And now I feel like, yeah, it's taken a bunch of years, but I mean, well, now we're almost coming up to our 50th reunion. So I guess it's taken, I have a voice now for sure, but I probably have too much of one. Everyone says I don't, that I talk too much, but I would say that is something that, it took a while to regain that.
Yeah. After deciding to take the risk to pursue what was most interesting to you from a subject area, but then being met with this environment.
I mean, there were hardly any female professors in biology. There was one, and
Yeah.
she was my advisor for my thesis, but you know, that was it was rare in the sciences. Yeah.
So that then takes me to being Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander on campus during that time. What was that like? What were the numbers like? Well, you know, was that the feature that was kind of notable, or was it more about gender as well? And I guess the gender question is more for the women here, since it was a boys' school prior for the class of 68. But I'm just curious if you guys could share, and whichever, just jump in, what were the numbers like?
Dan, you did the numbers in our class. Explain them.
Well, there were only 3 Asian Americans that we know of. That's
In a class of 800.
Cedric and myself and another classmate named Tai Sam Chu. We were the only Asian Americans. There were also a total of, counting us, there was a total of 10 Asians. There was a Japanese and there another one from Thailand, but the rest were mainly Chinese, actually. There was a violinist who is now a musician in San Francisco. And there was a South American who actually became a regent of the university. And so actually there were very few of us. And when I came to Dartmouth, you know, I have two first names, Daniel and Tom. And at the matriculation certificate signing ceremony, they reversed my name to be Tom Daniel. And they apologized, but they said, we'll have the president sign this certificate and we will correct it and send it to you later. So that was the first time that I realized that I was an Asian different from anyone else. And also there was a time when I realized I'm the only black-haired student in this class. And if I sat in the front row and fell asleep, I would be very noticeable. And so that was also a challenge. And the Chinese had affairs, events, and such as New Year's time, and they would invite all the Asians to it. And so we attended these, but amongst the Asians, there were very few of us.
No, we love the food.
Yes.
And Evie and Celia, what were the numbers like 10 years later?
I don't know, actually. I can remember it looked like to me like there was 5, you know, maybe no more than 5 Asians in my class. How about you, Effie?
I think back, you know, my 4 years there, even though I was away junior year, I would say there were no more than a dozen Asians on campus at any one time.
Mm-hmm.
And basically everybody knew everybody, you know, and yeah, I mean, there are so few of us.
And was gender more of a marker on your identity than ethnicity when you were at Dartmouth?
Probably, because my class was 3-to-1. You know, they had to increase the number of students per class in order to make coeducation acceptable to, you know, the board of trustees, as well as, you know, the current students and alums. So instead of 750 male students per class, it was increased to 1,000. So 250 would be women or girls, you know. So my class was 3-to-1. And I remember when I arrived in 73, there were still 2 classes ahead that were just, you know, just 100% male. And that, at that time, the ratio on campus was 5 guys to 1 girl. So definitely gender was far more the thing than, you know, than race or, you know, anything else. That was my impression anyway. Wouldn't you agree, Celia?
Yeah, totally. I've had other students ask me, well, what aspect of your person was the most important in terms of feeling like you were in a minority? And it was definitely being female. Honestly, it's interesting to hear you say those numbers, Evie, because I had this perception, and I'm probably completely wrong, that the ratio was actually higher men to women. But I just remember going, well, first of all the science classes I was in they were largely male, but going into Thayer Dining Hall and seeing an entire sea of male faces and looking for our few female friends. And I have some of my friends joining us tonight, and we were down in the river cluster, banished to the hinterlands of the college. And I felt so lucky because we were in an all-female dorm. And I don't know that it would have been a lot harder, I think, for me if we hadn't
Definitely.
had
Yeah,
that.
yeah, definitely, Celia, because I was also in an all-female dorm. I was in Woodward across from the gym, which meant most of the other girls in the dorm were jocks, and I was anything but a jock, but we were great friends, and we would go to the dining hall together. We had our own little table all the time, and that was our mother load, I guess. Yeah, so definitely, yeah. Oh yeah, I hear you, Celia.
Thank
So
you for sharing that.
I just went through my yearbook.
Curtis, is that you?
Kelvin Chin,
Calvin, sorry. Go ahead.
1973. I just went through my yearbook, and there were 6 of us. 6,
Wow.
5 men, 1 woman.
Wow.
And it's amazing because, Asians are 20% of the class now, right? So 200 some odd, I mean, we're
700. There were 700 of us in my class. 700 something
the total, right?
total. So
Yeah.
6 out of 700. Do the math, whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's been an onslaught of change. And so as we move along in the evolution of your life experiences, let's talk about the major you left with, what you ended up doing with it, as well as maybe what some inspiration was for it. So I'm going to ask Dan, you had shared the inspiration behind your major, and actually it was very much as a result of the offer at Dartmouth. You want to talk about that?
Well, my major actually led me to Taiwan in 1969 while I was at the University of Washington in grad school. I joined a Chinese summer program to Taiwan, hosted by Oberlin College. And at that time, we were based at Tunghai University, and we lived in the dorms, and we had Chinese roommates who were hired, Tunghai students who were hired to be our roommates so that we would have someone to converse with in Chinese. And it was an 8-week program. And we actually, during that 8 weeks, we visited all the cultural sites in Taiwan, Taroko Gorge, Tainan, Hualien, the Cross Island Highway, the Pacific Island Highway, the Pescadores. And so we had a very wonderful experience. And we also experienced typhoons. We had 2 typhoons while we were there. No earthquakes, but 2 typhoons. Well, actually, during one of the typhoons, there was an earthquake also.
Now,
And,
Dan, what's your ethnic origin? If you could share that.
my ethnic origin is Japanese Chinese. I have a Chinese last name because my father is Chinese and my mother is Japanese.
So how did you make the choice of what you would study?
Well, actually, Dartmouth didn't have very much of a Japanese history courses, and they also didn't offer Japanese, but they did offer Chinese language. And so I had the choice of picking the Chinese side, although I didn't grow up with my Chinese culture, because of course my Chinese grandparents were deceased by that time, and by the time I was born. And my Japanese grandparents were the ones that I knew. And of course, my culture, therefore, growing up was Japanese. And my grandfather had come to Hawaii as a pineapple farmer, and he went back to Japan to find a bride, his picture bride, and he didn't like the picture bride after he saw her because she was kind of weak, and he farmer's wife and do the keen for his laborers. And want me to continue? And so my grandmother was substituted as the bride for him, and she came to Hawaii, and she left the boat, got off the ship, wearing her wedding kimono, which has now been donated to the Smithsonian.
Amazing, amazing history. Cedric, so I'd love to hear the inspiration behind your major and how Dartmouth affected what you ended up going off to study.
Sure. So I was one of those many pre-meds, and I thought I was a real science jock. And so just to prepare for organic chemistry, I took it the summer after freshman year at the University of Hawaii. I did no work. I got a solid B. All the other kids in class thought I was brilliant. I went back to Hanover that fall, and I got a D in organic chemistry. It was not the same course. They used some of the same terms, but it was not at all the same course that I had done so well in at UH. So I said, okay, I guess I'm not a science guy. And my favorite subject had been Anthropology 1. And so I started focusing on anthropology, sociology, social psychology, and at ROTC summer camp. And so it would have been at Fort Devens in the summer of 1967. I was thinking, I've got to find a grad school subject to go to because I could get a deferment to go to graduate school. And I didn't want to go on active duty and end up in Vietnam. And the cover story in July of that year was the Harvard-MIT Joint Urban Studies Center with Daniel Patrick Moynihan on the cover, who became Senator Moynihan later. And I went, wow, urban redevelopment. And these people are called city planners. I went back to campus in the fall, asked the secretary of the anthropology department who I should talk to. Go see Professor Eldridge in sociology, he'll tell you. I popped into his office. He said, great, take my course. And he scribbled down several of his courses. And he said, and apply to these graduate schools. And among them were Hunter and Rutgers. And I ended up at Rutgers, which turned out to be one of the top 5 urban planning graduate programs in the country forever. I had no idea. The tuition there was no difference. My father got to pay public university in-state tuition in New Jersey. After Dartmouth, he was really happy. And then, as I told you, I went in the Army, discovered that it kept me out of Vietnam, and I've always wanted to work with people in groups and cities. You know, the human habitation of people in cities and towns is what I really wanted to focus on. I've done it private sector, public sector, and just had a wonderful career. I have no complaints.
Thank you, Cedric. Celia, can you share the inspiration behind your major?
Yeah, well, it all starts with living in New Jersey, where there were hardly any Chinese people, and having to go into New York City to Chinatown to buy groceries with my parents. And we would have to drive in on the New Jersey Turnpike, which hasn't improved all that much since then. And it smelled really badly. It's a huge, landfill over there, I now know. But at the time, I was so struck by that as a kid, thinking this is really awful. And I was really impacted by how badly the environment was being treated. And that's as a little kid sitting in the car. And I think I grew up with that very strong impression and felt like, we have to do things better. And then Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, for those of you from that era. I had a student tell me they never heard of the book. I was so,
Oh,
but at the time and for many, many years, it has been, what started the environmental movement. And I read that in, I think, middle school. So I think that, drove me to really want to go into environmental science. But I also, coming from New Jersey, really wanted to be not in a suburban, urban area. And my mother said that I could not apply to a non-Ivy League school. So this was my way of getting to go to a kind of place I wanted to go to in the middle of the woods, but fulfill her mandate. So anyway, and Dartmouth had a really good environmental studies program actually at the time. And I majored in biology, but then also modified with environmental studies. So it really allowed me to become an environmental scientist. And probably the real impetus and inspiration was my mentor, who was Hannah Crosdale in the biology department. She's the only female professor I had in the sciences, and she took me on as her senior thesis student. And, I really think that it took just that feeling that she believed in me, because I wasn't feeling so much of that when I was at Dartmouth. It was hard, and she believed in me. And I think that just launched me into feeling like I could become a scientist. So Dartmouth did give me that. And it was because of an incredible mentor.
And you became part of this national environmental movement of the 70s.
I've been working in this field for a long time. It was exciting when I got out of Dartmouth, because that's when all of the environmental legislation was passed in the US, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. Those things were all happening as we left college. And so there was a lot of things going on. And that's how I got my first job and all those kinds of things.
Excellent. And Evie, take us home with, in particular, how your music major was, why was it perceived the way it was when you took off from Dartmouth? What happened at Dartmouth?
Oh, well, what happened at Dartmouth, or what, when I took off?
The
Well, to
congregation.
backtrack, yes. So when I left Dartmouth and I went on to music school and got a master's, from New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. As a matter of fact, when I got there, I came across, in studying Baroque music performance, I came across a very famous tenor in Boston who's specialized in Baroque music. And his name was Richard Conrad. And as soon as I mentioned that, I had done undergrad at Dartmouth, he just lit up like a Christmas tree. He said, Dartmouth, I went to the Congregation of the Arts, which is a festival in the summers at Dartmouth for several years. And it was amazing how it was done. It was world-renowned conductors, composers, performers, teachers would be brought to campus, okay? I mean, even today, you mention any of the names, it would be name dropping, okay? Name dropping. Most of them came from Europe, but some from, United States. And the students that came to study, if they were good enough to be accepted, they didn't have to pay tuition. They were housed and fed, free room and board and free tuition. And they worked with, just the top names in every field. And so by the time I met Richard Conrad, he just, like, wow, you're from Dartmouth. And he just couldn't stop talking about the Congregation of the Arts. And I had never even heard of that, during my time at Dartmouth, because by then it was gone, nothing like that. And so that was a real eye opener for me. And since then, I actually tried a couple of times, because I was in touch with several of the college presidents, because I was co-president of the Dartmouth Club of France during my 20 years in Paris, and I tried to get Dartmouth to revive that festival, but it was never the right time. And maybe now we can try it again because, the college has, built all these wonderful, arts center, visual arts and stuff that I think, there's money for it now. And that is actually one branch. The music branch seems to me still a bit weak, as opposed to in the visual arts and all that we keep hearing about. So maybe this is a good time to, broach the subject again. But it was just, I never thought my Dartmouth degree was going to open doors like it did in the world of music because of the Congregation of the Arts. I had nothing to do with it. It was, no merit of my own. I can't take credit for any of it, but just because I went to Dartmouth, people say, oh, wow, so, that's a shoe-in already. So voila.
Amazing. I mean, who knew? Dartmouth, Mecca of music.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And you did tell me you were going to keep putting that bug in Hanlon's ear, your classmate, to see if maybe in his retirement he'd be interested in
That's right. That's right. You bet.
Necessitating this. So let's move on to life's work. You've already started to touch upon it. Cedric, why don't you start us off with, for you, the life's work that you gushed about ended up coming after some pivot and some layoffs. So talk about that.
Yes. So I got out of the Army and got my first job as a city planner in Rochester, New York. This would have been 1973. And the major project they put me on, because I was the most recent planning school graduate, was completely revising the city of Rochester's zoning ordinance. And as luck would have it, they had just engaged an attorney consultant who at the time was considered the guru of zoning in the United States, Richard Babcock. And he was a Dartmouth grad. So suddenly he took me under his wing and I got to personally rewrite and redraw the map of the city of Rochester, New York's zoning ordinance back in the 70s. 20 years later, I ran into the then director who said, oh, you're Cedric Kam. We just revised your ordinance. I went, oh, what was wrong with it? And I had designed it to be flexible. I personally don't like hard and fast rules. I'm not a black and white person. And I made the staff think about what they were doing when they made changes. I had written it to force them to consider impact, not just percents and numbers. And they didn't like that. It was too hard for them to think about things. For example, I had said, you can put a grocery store of up to, say, 5,000 square feet, but not a 50,000 square foot supermarket in this neighborhood. Well, that bothered them, things like that. And then from there, I went to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development because our oldest child was just starting to learn to talk. This was in 1979. And Western New York accent, if any of you are familiar with it, is horrible. For example, Catholic Charities. And she was calling me Daddy. So we moved back to New England to be close to my wife's parents, ended up in Connecticut. And then Ronald Reagan got elected and our boss sat two of us down and said, okay, guys, you're my best employees. Time to leave the government. There's going to be a bloodbath around here in the next 4 to 8 years. So two of us left. We both took courses in finance. Luckily, I still had the GI Bill. So I took all the finance courses and MBA. And we both got laid off from Fleet Bank at one time or another, but that's another story. So while I was in corporate America, Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company, I got to meet the chairman emeritus of the board of directors, Charlie Zimmerman, whom I met personally because I went back to visit Paul Liu in Honolulu when Paul said, go see Charlie. He signed my Dartmouth diploma. Whenever I go into the Blunt Alumni Center and walk past the Zimmerman Lounge, there's a picture of the Charlie I personally knew. See, Dartmouth has done this to me. And I got to invest in real estate, commercial real estate all over the country. I did apartments in New Jersey, shopping centers in California. I foreclosed in Texas, you name it. But I also got to run the company's real estate corporate responsibility program, where we did affordable housing in Connecticut cities. And that's, I forgot to mention this when I spoke to you, Gina, that I was very proud of that. And they gave me that program because I had worked at HUD. And so, you know, you have a resume and people just assume things of you. And then I ended up doing economic development in New London, Connecticut, because after Connecticut Mutual merged with Mass Mutual, I got laid off. But one of my Dartmouth classmates had done consulting in New London, and he said, I have just the job for you, and they hired me. So I was executive director of the nonprofit 501c3 that tried to diversify the economy of the most defense-dependent county in the United States, New London County, Connecticut. Then the new governor cut the budget, and I said, I can't afford with 2 kids going to college. So I got hired by Fleet Bank and became the community development officer for the state of Connecticut. I got to sign $25 million agreement with the state attorney general. And when they merged with Bank of Boston and I lost my job again, I said, I'm going back to the government because I'm tired of getting laid off. As a veteran, you know, you have, you're the first hired and last fired. And they had an opening in Boston, GS 15. If you know anything about the general service schedule, it stops at 15. So I went back at the top level. I see, you'll enjoy this. I got to speak at the National Brownfields Convention. I was the HUD official in New England who worked most closely with the EPA. I was always over at EPA Boston. And I redeveloped quite a number of old cities in New England. I'm proudest of doing all the mill buildings in Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm proud of rebuilding the entire downtown of the city of Winooski, Vermont, right next to Burlington. And if any of you are familiar with Mass MoCA, it was federal funds that I managed that helped diversify the economy of North Adams, Massachusetts. And it's a wonderful museum. You should go there and visit it. And so
it sounds like we need to do a tour of the Northeast for all of the projects that you had your hands in.
Indeed, indeed.
So I'm going to jump over to Celia. In particular, I'd love for you to share kind of where you ended up taking your passion, and in particular, how you think about the future generation that you're preparing for this work to continue.
Yeah, I ended up as an environmental scientist, but I certainly never expected to be a professor. I think when I left Dartmouth, that would have been the last thing I thought I would become, because I'm sure I would have felt like I would be terrified to be in front of students lecturing. And, because I have always worked at the interface of science and policy. So, you know, my first job was an environmental consulting firm that did a lot of the work for the new legislation that I just mentioned earlier. And then I went to grad school for oceanography, and I, you know, really felt that I wanted to use the science to, you know, make change. And so I ended up doing a congressional fellowship down in Washington, which was very eye-opening. And then I worked at the National Academy of Sciences, also doing sort of like trying to take science and, you know, help policy make decisions about science. And that was very interesting. But I at the National Academy, I was around a lot of scientists who, you know, worked on specific systems like the Chesapeake Bay and Gulf of Mexico and all these places. And I felt really, I missed going out in the field. I love going out in the field. That's my favorite part of doing research. And I felt a little bit jealous of these people. And while I never thought I would get a PhD, because I thought that I would want to just work, you know, in sort of the policy science realm, I ended up going back for a PhD. And so then, you know, that's how I ended up. I went back to Dartmouth, or I came back to Dartmouth for my PhD. We have a very good ecology PhD program. And it also pays for your entire 5 years that you're there, which is really great and remarkable. And that isn't always the case in PhD programs. So, and then, you know, by the time I was finishing my PhD at Dartmouth, I already had my first daughter. So, you know, you're not about to up and move. And I had the opportunity to become part of a research center on toxic metals. So I've ended up, you know, studying contaminants in the way that I kind of thought I would want to when I was driving into Chinatown. So I think, you know, that has been, and the full circle event was I have studied mercury for a long time and how mercury gets into fish, basically. And the worst mercury site on the East Coast is in the Meadowlands, which is the place that we passed when I went into Chinatown as a kid. And so now not only did I drive by it when I was a kid, but then I've been back to that place doing field work in a very unsavory place, let's say that. So yeah, so it's just, and I ended up having the privilege of teaching Dartmouth students. I never thought that I would do that, but it is so, I love teaching Dartmouth students, and I feel like, you know, they are so smart and they really help me to grow. And I love having the opportunity to mentor them in my lab. Yeah.
Thank you, Celia. And we're going to wrap with this question. So Dan, I want to hear from you. Just in particular, you made a pivot from history to language. Do you want to share with folks in a minute why you did that and why that was meaningful?
Well, after teaching in Taiwan, I switched courses from deciding to teach Chinese history and decided to teach the Chinese language instead. So I returned to Hawaii and did a master's degree in teaching Chinese as a second language. I thought that students would be more interested in learning Chinese because it was something that they could use and it would be useful. And at the time, Chinese wasn't taught very much in the high schools and in the colleges. And so it would be a language that they could use to communicate with others in a field that was growing, and that was an upcoming field. And of course, today, a lot of people are learning Chinese because it is for business, and also because of national defense and all the problems that are coming up with China. And they could also use it in their studies. Many of my students in Chinese were also graduates or studying for degrees in Chinese or in city planning or other areas connected with China. I was a teaching assistant in Chinese for 2 years, and then a lecturer and eventually an instructor before I became the program coordinator for the Center for Language and Technology. I still was in the field of languages, but I also now was working in the field of all languages. And the Language Center changed a lot over the years, from reel-to-reel tapes to cassettes to DVDs to MP3s, and it is a very different field today.
Thank you, Dan. And Evie, take us home. You need to explain forbidden music and how you got there and what we need to know about it.
Okay, forbidden music, I'm actually borrowing the term from a book by that title that was published in 2013 by my excellent friend and colleague Michael Haas. And it refers to music that had been banned by the Nazis. So, you know, I would say the period would be during the Weimar Republic, which let's say 1920s and 1930s. And for most people, even the most serious concert goer today, I think a lot of us still think there's no good music coming out of Germanic culture, during those, 2 decades, and that's just not true. There's a ton of wonderful music from that period, but because the Nazis banned it, so, scores, not only were performances banned, scores were burned, we won't go into the book burning here, but so.
And Evie,
so
what
a
were
lot
the
of people,
groups? What were the groups that they were banning their music? Which group?
Okay, for the Nazis, you had, the only acceptable race would be Aryan, but if you're Jewish, or if you're socialist, if you're a gay, homosexual, or anything that didn't fit the Aryan mode, that was, they call it Antarctica, which is decadent, or that's a hard word to translate. So anything outside of that was not acceptable. So they banned. There was degenerate. That's a word. Antarctica is degenerate art, degenerate music, degenerate, whatever, literature and stuff. And so the Nazis did this, banned. So a lot of composers, if they were lucky, they had connections and they were able to get out to the US or, to the UK or even, South America or Australia. But most of them, a lot of them ended up in concentration camps and, were murdered. Okay. But even the Nazis could not burn their music, like the scores, the sheet music that quickly, because there was still scores in libraries, at publishers, the original plates, for scores. And so after the war, some musicologists, start rediscovering, this music, because, okay, I backtrack a little. All these composers were highly successful during their lifetime. It's not like today, people don't want to hear new music. Back then, people wanted to hear new things. And these composers were really successful. They were getting, performances, and they were getting published, and they were getting royalties from, scores being rented out to, opera companies or, concert halls. And they were able to make a living being composers. Okay. Mm-hmm. And some of them were so successful, they were named directors, say the Berlin Academy of Music. Okay. Or the Vienna, conservatory music. That's how successful they were. But unfortunately, because they were high profile, and if they were even a quarter Jewish, that was a no-go, for the Nazis. So they got banned altogether. And I just happened to stumble upon, one particular composer. There was a concert. I still remember, this was late February 1995 in Paris. There was one particular concert that was organized by a foundation in Los Angeles at the time, of one particular composer by the name of Franz Schrecker. And I actually could not attend that concert that night, but it was broadcast on the radio about a month later. And as soon as I heard the music, I said, what is this music? I had never heard anything like it. And as I mentioned to you, Gina, and as all of us here, that went to Dartmouth can identify with, remember apple cider, sweet cider that we loved drinking, okay? If you pick up a bottle a jar of apple cider and that's on the edge of going bad. It hasn't gone totally bad, but if you drink it, it gives you that sort of heady, yeah, I see people
Buzz,
laughing.
yeah,
Right?
the buzz.
Yeah,
That's this
Well,
music.
that's what this music feels like. Okay, you hear this music, it's like, it's beyond romanticism, but it hasn't gone bad yet. Oh, it didn't go too far. It hadn't gone bad yet. And I remember just being totally blown away. I said, what is this music? Why have I never heard anything like it? And that started, my involvement. Eventually, I attended conferences and mostly musicology conferences. I still remember the first one I went to in Vienna. And as soon as all the musicologists realized I was a performer, okay, not a musicologist, I was surrounded by them because performers don't come to such conferences. So musicologists, they do all this wonderful research. They know all these things exist, but they're talking among themselves. It's not getting out, right? And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And they surrounded me and I realized instantly, my God, I have a job here. It's my job to get this music out because I know conductors, I know musicians, I know concert organizers, festival organizers. And I was able to, just say, okay, get the scores to me. I'll look through the scores, which I was able to read thanks to my music major at Dartmouth. Comes back to that, right? Okay. And then I was able to get all this out to, fast forward to today, these works are back in the standard repertoire. They don't have to, they're not being treated as new music because they were part of the standard repertoire and it just got banned thanks to Nazis. So a lot of it's back, in the standard repertoire. It's no longer, a surprise. Oh, here's, something banned by, the Nazis. And even here in the States, I moved back to States in 2011, and I moved back also because my parents were getting on with age. That's very Asian thing, right? We come back, but I also realized I didn't need to be based in Europe anymore because this music was back in place back in Europe, and I still have good contacts there. But here it was American orchestras and opera companies that needed this kind of push, say, hey, this is wonderful music. You need to, know about this. And also because some of the composers, the most successful ones that had, they had contacts in the US, they came to the US, but their grandchildren are our age. They're not musicians. They don't know how to go about reviving their grandfather's music, let alone, promoting it. That's where I come in. So I've been in touch with, their grandchildren and trying to get things out. And I'm happy to say, things have worked out very well for the music. And one more thing that I might add, the fact that I'm not Jewish actually helped the cause. Because you hear about Jewish musicians promoting this music, but the question always comes in, is it because the music is good or is it because it's by a Jewish composer? But I come in, looking at what I do, singing the music I'm known for singing, and I say, hey, this is music important. And it's not just vocal music because I can read those darn scores. I'm able to say to a conductor, hey, here's a great piece, for an orchestra, a symphony, or say to the string quartet, hey, here's this great piece and I have the score and I know what it sounds like because once again, thanks to Dartmouth, I know what it sounds like. I said, I can get the score to you. You look at it and you decide whether or not it's worth performing. And that's how it got done.
Evie, the passion is palpable. Thank you for doing the service to humankind. Fait accompli, right? That's my point there.
Well, I don't know. It's never done. The work's never done. No. But.
So this is a point in time where we're gonna wrap and thank Celia, Evie, Cedric, Dan for the honesty, the history, the Dartmouth reflections. There are decades between us, but as we said, there is a tangled web, a Dartmouth tangled web that allows us to walk in each other's Dartmouth worlds. And we thank you for opening up these scenes to us that we can now have lived and be more aware of. So there are more conversations like this coming. This is part of the DAPAAA 25th programming. We will continue with other classes working up to our celebration on campus next May and have a cross section there as well. I know that many of us are prepared to stay on, including my members of the panel. There is a very rich chat that's been going on. I would love to entertain some of those comments and questions that were made. And I know my panel would be more than happy to field some of those questions. So for those who can stay, we will continue on. I know, Belinda, you may want to close for those that need to take off. So let me know.
Yeah, just thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you, Gina, for guiding discussion. Cedric, Celia, Daniel, Evie, oh my goodness, like what richness of these stories. And I think we need more time is the lesson here, is that we need more time to talk story here. So, and grateful for everyone who joined today. And we'll, as Gina mentioned, hopefully we'll see you all. There's a, if you click on that URL, QR code, or the link that Sarah just sent, there's a quick survey there for you to, we're trying to gauge sort of who might be coming. As you know, George Takai will be coming, but also Helen Zia, noted activist and author. She is also going to be on campus as well for our celebration. And we will follow up with an email, because we actually have hotel reservations are open now, and you know how hotel reservations are. But we do also encourage you to get involved. If you're interested in joining the planning committee, you can email the DAPAAA co-chairs or DAPAAA at 25th. And also a request out, we are doing, we're going to have an exhibit at Barry Baker Libraries. And so if you have photographs, if you have old program events, flyers that you have in your shelves and drawers and everything, and you wouldn't mind maybe snapping a picture, sending it to us, if you'd like to sort of help us to document our history and our collective voices here, we would very much appreciate that. So any good photos, we've been finding some great photos with some great 80s styling. So that's been a lot of fun. And then, of course, if you are interested in joining the planning committee, please do so. And we are on social media. So please do get in touch with us. And don't forget, we will send out emails for October. We will be doing an event with the Dartmouth Club of Hawaii and NAD. So we're really excited for that. In honor of Boston Indigenous Peoples Day weekend in October. So many thanks. We'll stay behind as well for those, but we want to honor your time, those who have to take off, but we're going to stay here in conversation for a bit. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Belinda. Stephanie, do you want to read off that great question that came in about the time at Dartmouth and the gender dynamics? I don't know if you can find it. It's probably, you're on mute, hon.
I can't find it, but it was basically they wanted to hear more about the early period, especially about the gender issues, especially
I found it, Steph.
Okay.
Yeah, Donna, it was yours. It would be interesting to hear more about the dynamics between men and women in those early years. Have heard anecdotal stories, and in classes that was pretty brutal, but would prefer to hear a firsthand experience.
I have a lot of students who ask me about that too. I'll jump in. Evie, you should jump in if I say anything that isn't what you think.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I would say that the social sort of male-female aspects of Dartmouth at that time were really strange. And I mean, so much, and it is still true that so much of the social sort of center was the fraternities. And I think that is not untrue now, actually. And I have to say that's something that kind of still surprises me. But at that time, certainly that was where most of the social, there were no sororities at that time. So there was no gender balance in the Greek system. And so the whole question of dating was I never dated anyone when I was at Dartmouth, really. I mean, it was just very, I think, and we were in the years, our freshman year, Evie, you would have seen this too, that our freshman year, they still had the women from the women's colleges come up for
Road trips.
homecoming and winter carnival and all this stuff. And that's when the stuff happened where the women would get off of the buses and some of the men at the fraternities would be singing cattle songs. I mean, that was pretty horrific stuff. I just recently told 2 of my students who are male, and they couldn't even wrap their heads around this. And so, there was bad stuff like that. And but that said, I felt like I have some amazingly wonderful male friends, which I don't know if I would have had so many male friends if I hadn't been to such a male Dartmouth. But that part of it was, and they're still my friends too. I mean, my women friends from Hinman Hall, shout out to those on the call, are certainly the core of my being. But there were some really wonderful men that we all became friends with too. So it's not like it was all men were bad or anything. It was just there were some very bad behaviors still. And, sadly, some of those behaviors still exist, at Dartmouth. So, Evie, what do you think?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely, Celia. Yeah. I can think of, a number of things. I was fortunate, in a girls' dorm, a women's dorm, Woodward across from the gym. But Woodward, if you think of U-shaped building, but the upside down U, Woodward is, the top and the sides of Ripley and Smith. And Ripley and Smith, we call them, we girls in Woodward, we called ourselves Woodwardites. And then there's the Ripley boys and the Smith boys. And we were great friends with the guys. And I have lifelong friends, from those 2 dorms, because they were just like brothers, even closer than brothers in a sense, because we were all growing up together in a sense. When you're 18, through age 22, those, I think about those as my own formative years, and first time away from home, being independent, loving every minute. Nobody was ever homesick. I don't remember anyone being homesick. And the funniest thing was, the building itself, the bathrooms were at the corners, of the U-shaped building at the corners. And the girls' dorm was in the middle, and the bathrooms divided, the girls' bathroom was here, and then there was a fire exit. And then the boys' bathroom was on the other side. And instead of going into the courtyard and into the entrance of, whichever dorm to visit your friend in the next dorm, we would just go through the bathrooms, okay? And what you did was, before going through, if a girl goes into the Woodward bathroom and you want to go into Smith, all you would do is knock on the fire exit, the fire door in between, and say, coming through, and if nobody answers, you just went through. And if somebody's in there, they'll say, wait a minute, and then whoever is in there will make sure he or she is properly dressed or well covered, and then and went through. So it was like at home, really, just back and forth all the time. And so you couldn't help but become really good friends, with the neighboring dorm mates or whatever, what have you. And so I, like Celia, I had lifelong friends, not only from Woodward, the Woodwardites, but also from Ripley and Smith, just because we grew up together like that. Yeah. But on the flip side, I remember freshman springs, there was Hums, which is a, fraternity singing contest. Remember that, Celia?
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember my freshman spring, one particular frat, they sang the co-hog song, not co-ed, the co-hog song, right? And the then college dean of the college was Carl Brewster. He actually got up and sang with them, and he was canned. Okay, well, he wasn't canned per se. I mean, not in those, not in those terms per se, but he left. and that was why, so he left.
Yeah, that there is a exhibit of that at the bottom of Dartmouth Hall, as part of our history. Yeah.
Yep, the cohort. Yeah, and then
I'm gonna
as to
actually,
go ahead.
Can I invite Curtis in? Yeah, because Curtis, you had a similar question, but on another vector.
Yeah. Well, I would say that as someone who was also there during that time period, the sexual harassment of the women there was just unconscionable at times. And while there's some incredible friendships that were created, there was also a lot of objectification. Hums was just one major example of that. And I actually joined one of the frats, was probably one of the worst hum singers, and eventually left it because of their attitudes around women. And so, it's one of those things that most of the women who were let in, who sort of accepted, and I let in is probably not a slip either, because I think that was the mentality, were chosen because they were pretty tough people. These, as my daughter would call them, they were badass chicks. So, and they had to be because of just that environment. And I would say the same for those of us who are folks of color. This was not, I will say one thing, if I were to answer that question, what did I leave behind at Dartmouth? It was my whiteness, because I recognized what I would have to deal with. Now, it helped me in terms of knowing how to navigate, particularly upper class whiteness, working class whiteness I'd always been around. But that upper and elite class whiteness, that was something really new, because they tended not to get mad, they just got even. And they could get even. And so I think, one of the things that I'm mindful of is yes, there are great things and it positioned me, but Dartmouth gave me the opportunity, but I did the dang gum work. And it wasn't like Dartmouth said, rule. Anyway, I just want to say that, those of us who are there oftentimes didn't complain because there was no reason. I mean, you had to suffer in silence because you understood this was your ticket. I wasn't at Dartmouth to make, I hope I contributed to Dartmouth. I continue to contribute to Dartmouth, in other ways, but I knew my silence was my ticket so that I could get to the next, because Dartmouth wasn't the end game. So I think that's important.
And I just want to follow up, because I mean, you were representing in different ways on campus, and I'm wondering, as an Afro-Asian, and what did you ever feel like what was the connection, the bridging with the Asian community between then the Afro community? I mean, what do you recall?
Well, there really wasn't any, because there wasn't an Asian community to bridge to. There were Asian individuals. Like I said in the chat, I got together with another AAPI and a third culture white woman who grew up in China, and we did Asian Students Association, a union, and our program was to do something with off-campus folks, community folks, not to the campus. So there wasn't a community to bridge. As an Afro-Asian, this is also a time of Black nationalism. And so there really wasn't a whole lot of space for me in the Black community if I was going to hang on to my Asianness. And so I ended up going to Japan, which is where I was born, my family's from, and become an Asian studies major, doubled with the econ. But and that's led to a lot of what I've done in my life professionally, and even now sitting here in Tokyo. But even that has changed over time. I'm now really active in the Black Alumni Dartmouth Association. So it things change, but that moment for those who are younger, that the 70s coming out of the 60s was a really interesting time, because it was just far enough past all the sort of highly active civil rights and all those other kind of disruptions, and so people were trying to sort of get normalized. You know, even when you talk about Moynihan, I blanch because the Moynihan report probably hurt the Black community more than anything else around. And so he's no hero to me. And I've been fighting him as a social scientist since. So, you know, I just wanted to put that out there because I mean, I love Dartmouth. I give to it, I attribute to it. I have a championship football ring, all sorts of other things, right? And it has opened up many, many doors. But I'm not going to bow down. I don't worship Dartmouth.
Thank you, Curtis. Iris, thank you for being patient. Go ahead.
I was there the first year of coeducation. I'm class of 76. I chose to graduate in 75 because I couldn't take it anymore. If anyone is interested in those early years, there's someone called Tobin Traver who's written a master's thesis after interviewing women from the first 3 classes. It's just coming out now. I was one of those interviewed. It will be in the Dartmouth archives. And I'm half Chinese. My father's from New Hampshire and my mother's from Beijing. And those first years, that first year in particular, they were really terrible. The first year I was here only, I'm like Curtis, I go back and forth what I identify myself as. I guess I had hoped at Dartmouth to have an Asian community because I'd never had one. I spent my childhood in Nigeria. I'm sorry, I'm very mixed up. But I also, deep down, I felt because of my father's many generations living in New Hampshire, farming, I felt I had a right to be at Dartmouth. You know, I thought I had a geographical right. And you could never forget you were a girl. You could never forget you were female. I'd actually gone through the first year of coeducation at Exeter. So I thought I was ready and I thought I could do it. But you could do it if you put your head down, and as Curtis said, if you snuck around, it was fine. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say, Curtis, that you did that. But if you didn't take anything on, you could make your way. I took too much on my first couple of years and I got sort of burnt out. I mean, to imagine now, there was no student center. There was nowhere to meet. I was in Fairweather, which was the only dorm where there were 2 or 3 dorms that had common rooms. I really pushed myself to try and do everything to make all changes at Dartmouth I could. And then my second year, I sort of felt that most students at Dartmouth liked it the way it was, and I was wasting myself. And then the last year I got academic and I got out. I sort of wish now I had done 4 years and stayed academic 2 years, but I just wanted out. Yeah. There was no Asian society. There were a handful of Asian students. One of my friends was Evie's older brother, who was in my class.
I remember Iris. Hi.
And Evie's older brother and Hoyt Xia were both, Helen's younger brother, were both language monitors. I tried to take Chinese, which was a disaster for me. I did a lot of Asian religion. I ended up as a religion major. There was a handful of people, but they were really, most of the students were graduate students. There really wasn't anything. Okay, sorry, went on so long.
Thank you, Iris. I mean, part of having this conversation is really recognizing that there were those who pioneered and chartered and paved the way so that the rest of us did not have to experience that. And so these celebrations of 25 and 50 years across our communities, you know, it's about honoring that past. You know, we have our ways as humans, and they're not always pretty. And change is difficult. And those that have the courage to go first meet much of that moment and much of that challenge. And so this is a bit of also gratitude and honoring that generosity of spirit that all of us can now appreciate and have been able to come through it in a different light. And yes, there's still opportunity on campus, and that's much of the reason why many of us stay connected to the college, so that we can be of comfort to students, to staff, to faculty, as the place continues to evolve into the best Dartmouth it can be, which there is room.
May I add one more thing? My
course.
daughter graduated in class of 14.
Nice.
And so it was, when she chose to come to Dartmouth, I didn't do that interview, didn't do any of that. And my husband did that one. I wept when she chose to come to Dartmouth. She had other really good choices, because I didn't believe that anyone I knew or was connected with would ever benefit from what we went through. And it was, I got a lot from, Dartmouth, but I got a lot from Dartmouth, but it took a lot too. And one thing I lost, I really did not make female friends because there weren't enough of us. Okay, that's all.
How does your daughter feel about Dartmouth today?
She got a wonderful education. I probably should have been tougher. I thought I was fairly honest with her about how hard it was, but I was also very naive, because I thought that, whatever 30 years would have, I'm 38 years old, okay, 38 years would have changed Dartmouth more than it did. It didn't change it in the essence of being able to get a wonderful education and really but there's still the push to not be an individual. My daughter joined a sorority, which would, for me, would have been, to go near frat row or sorority, but she got a wonderful education, and she excelled in, it was good for her. Socially, it was very, very rough, very, very rough. She's the one who told me about this panel. I never would have known, because I'm not really in Dartmouth alumni circles.
Well, thank you for joining us, Iris, and thank you for sharing. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dana. I'm a 20. I just wanted to say I just so appreciate hearing the stories of all these alums, because so as a student, sometimes, especially since I was in a sorority as well, so when I rush, like, you hear these stories about the Quahog song, that was like a kind of scandalous thing that happened when I was rushing, because on our bid night, there was this thing that the beta class that was rushing the same year had made a reference to that. And then it was kind of this whole thing. So that was when I first heard about it. And then I remember I took a history class and we talked a little bit about Dartmouth, and they had pictures of the messages that the guys wrote and put in the dorms. I was like, go away co-eds, or like, go away hogs or something. It was just crazy things. And I remember always thinking, like, I cannot imagine what it would be like to go through that. So it's very powerful to hear that. And also it's very interesting to hear, Evelyn, you talking about how you actually were friends with your classmates, because it just, as an outsider looking in on the history, you just like imagine it to be an incredibly hostile environment. Yeah, and it's really just amazing to think about other Asian Americans and Asian people being at Dartmouth so early on, because like for me, I graduated in 2020. I thought it was very hostile. I mean, not overtly, but like I do feel like it was hostile to Asian people. I'm from Long Island. I grew up around like all sorts of people, and I grew up around a lot of white people. So I didn't think it'd be crazy going to Hanover. But I mean, Curtis, when you were talking about kind of upper class, like that vibe from upper class white people, it's crazy. So yeah, I just want to say, like, this panel has really helped me feel very seen in a way that I didn't realize. Because sometimes you leave Dartmouth and you think, I don't know, I've always thought, like, my current thinking right now is I wouldn't feel comfortable donating money to Dartmouth, because I love so much of what I've gotten from that experience. But I think there's so many hard things that people experience, not just people of color, but like women just in general, that I think the institution is responsible for. And I guess it's just interesting to hear other people feel the same way of
Can I ask, is the Quahog song still circulating on campus at this point? I'm a 77, and I won't tell you who wrote the song, but in an odd way, I was in that fraternity that used to sing that song, and so as a person coming through it, I guess we didn't think about it in a very deep sense, obviously. And I will say that, my daughter didn't go to Dartmouth, but if she had gone there, I'm not sure I would have, in the 1977 era, guided her to go hang out at the fraternity. But having said that, one of the really interesting things that I will point out and actually defend is the fraternity that I was in is an incredibly tight bunch of people. At the 45th reunion, I was just counting up. More than 10% of the class was that fraternity class of us coming back. So it's become an incredibly cohesive group. And as the only Asian, actually Curtis was in the same fraternity as me. It's very interesting that the dynamic that holds that group together, and that was part of the old Dartmouth, there was something there. And we still get together every 5 years. We all come back to campus. So it's really interesting that even among this sampling that we've got here, we've got a sense of divergence of people that were less comfortable, and people that didn't realize it at the time, but ended up being part of that fabric. So it's interesting. It really is.
I mean, yeah, I'll comment and say, like, maybe the money comment was strong. I brought it up just to say, like, I have such conflicting feelings. I'm so happy that I was in a sorority. I know this might be controversial, but like, I enjoyed a lot of my social experience. I felt very connected, but I also feel that I think it's a little bit of a problem, the social dynamics that emerge at the school. And because of that, and like, because I didn't really see a lot of the institution directing attention towards that in a way that I felt would benefit students, that's why right now, as like a person in my 20s, I'm like, you know what, I don't feel ready to donate to something. I don't know if it's going to a cause.
No, that's fine. I feel I lost my train of thought here, but I know I'm coming back to, it was, as a 77er, it was an incredibly turbulent period, really, socially, with cross currents. I mean, I came in and experienced the 5-1, and I was a gorky, geeky 17-year-old because I was a year younger coming in, and so I did road trips. You get senior, junior people with cars, and I'd go off down to Holyoke. But I think it was interesting when the Quahog song and a bunch of others that were similar, were written. I think it was a lot of people, frankly feeling, gosh, there are 5 of us and there's only one, co-ed out there. So I think that some of that dynamic was driven by that, but also remember that, as a 77er, there were people coming back from Vietnam who were on the 5-year program, who were fully steeped in the 100% Dartmouth is only male culture. And as an impressionable freshman and partly a sophomore, you've got these older people, juniors and seniors, and the people on the 5-year plan and the 6-year plan coming back, who were, to use a fraternity word, were gods. They just influenced the younger generation. So it takes a while for that to work its way through the system.
Well, I'd say that dynamic, I feel like, still exists. Like my friends that I knew from freshman year, boys, like, I saw what happened when they rushed. It's the same thing. They looked up to the upperclassmen boys like gods. And some boys had better, I don't know how to say it, but like better ways of treating people. And some people just let the power, so to speak, gets their heads and how they treat other people. And I saw some of my friends change kind of based on that. So it's just interesting, like that dynamic that I noticed existed
Yeah.
when you were in school too.
Well,
Sir,
the saving grace of all this is, now that we're, all done with our careers and whatnot, I can confidently
She's just
tell
getting
you.
started, to be clear.
Yeah.